From Thom Hartmann's Daily Take Substack. The Atrocity Loop. Is America finding new ways to justify the unthinkable? From eugenics and AIDS denial to border kidnappings, the same cold logic endures. If the victims suffer enough, the powerful can call it order. Published November 7th, 2025. The following is a song inspired by this article.
There's blood in the soil and ghosts in the law. Names we forgot still scratch at the wall. We build up the promise, tear it back down, call it protection while burning the town. We've learned to smile while the innocent fall. Say it's just history, nothing at all. It's the atrocity loop, the circle of pain. Dehumanize, neglect, destroy, then start again. From cotton to cages, from silence to sin. We promise it's over, then we do it again.
They say we're improving, they swear we've grown kind, but mercy keeps dying somewhere behind. We bury the truth with a flag and a prayer, pretend not to see who's still bleeding there.
The headlines will fade, the faces will too, and we'll find a new them to blame it all through. It's the atrocity loop, the song we all know. We change the refrain, but the rhythm won't go. From chains to detention, from silence to spin. We promise it's over, then we do it again.
Turning, the lessons unlearned,
the candle's still burning,
for bridges we've burned.
Every time we forget,
the story repeats,
the ghosts keep on marching,
they don't miss a beat.
It's the atrocity loop, carved deep in our name. We'll rewrite the rules and replay the shame. From sorrow to silence, from loss to pretend. We promise it's over, then we do it again.
America has always been proud of its ingenuity, our capacity to invent, to innovate, to solve. But among our most consistent inventions is one we never admit to, but the Trump administration is now proudly highlighting: the machinery of cruelty. Generation after generation, we refine it, disguise it, and call it something noble. Quote, law and order, family values, national security, end quote. Each era congratulates itself for its moral progress while quietly perfecting the tools of human suffering. From the actuarial tables that justify the deaths of black people over 100 years ago, to the silence that let gay men die in the 1980s, to the unmarked vans prowling our streets today, the design remains the same. The faces change, the purpose, upholding straight white male supremacy, never does. While many Americans are shocked by the cruelty and brutality of Trump's, Miller's, Vance's, ICE, and CPB thugs against Hispanics in the United States, such attempts to, quote, purify, end quote, the country are really nothing new. Hopefully, though, our response to them will be different this time. One of the most shocking things I learned when I was writing The Hidden History of American Healthcare, while sickness bankrupts you and makes others insanely rich, was how much American policy was driven by white men in power who were trying to decrease the black population, both by deportations, like James Monroe tried, and through actual genocidal domestic health care policies. Around the turn of the 20th century, the Vice President of Prudential Insurance, Frederick L. Hoffman, published a widely cited, quote, scientific, end quote, book, claiming that black people were so biologically inferior that they would, quote, eventually die out, end quote. That he argued that if white society simply refused to extend Medicare, social support, or public health infrastructure to them, their extinction would, quote, occur naturally, end quote. It was an extraordinary act of pseudoscientific cruelty. A man with corporate and political power using the language of statistics in medicine to rationalize genocide by neglect. Hoffman's 1896, quote, Race Traits and Tendencies of the American Negro, end quote, one of the best-selling books of the early 1900s, became the actuarial and intellectual foundation of denying health care to black Americans to this day, giving white policymakers cover to block public health investment while claiming to be guided by, quote, data, end quote. Hoffman's claim is why there's a 20% hole in the traditional Medicare. It was created at the demand of white racist Southern senators, so elderly black people who couldn't afford the 20% copay wouldn't show up in then whites-only hospitals and doctors' offices. That same brutal logic, intentional genocide by state action or inaction, reappeared when the AIDS crisis erupted in the 1980s. The Reagan administration's response to the disease was defined by silence and contempt. As tens of thousands of mostly gay men got sick and died, several of them close friends of ours, America's bigoted President Reagan refused even to utter the word, quote, AIDS, end quote, throughout his presidency. His press secretary laughed from the official White House podium about gay men dying. Conservative pundits like Pat Buchanan called the disease, quote, nature's retribution, end quote, for, quote, immoral, end quote, homosexuality, and Senator Jesse Helms successfully banned federal funding for educational materials about safe sex and AIDS that he said might, quote, promote homosexual activity, end quote. William F. Buckley, Jr., who also wrote about the supposed genetic inferiority of black people, proposed tattooing people who had AIDS so that they could be identified, discriminated against, and segregated from the rest of us. The message from Republicans in power was unmistakable. The queer victims of HIV were morally defective, and they deserved their excruciatingly painful deaths, and government had no duty to save them. It was Hoffman's calculus all over again, dressed up in the language of religion and, quote, family values, end quote, instead of racial eugenics. Now, that same monstrous pattern is repeating itself, both along our borders and border towns, as well as in the interior of the United States. The logic of white racial and cultural superiority reflected by Republican rhetoric has today metastasized into open brutality. The so-called Kavanaugh stops, made possible by a morally evil shadow docket ruling written by Brett Kavanaugh for the corrupt Republicans on the Supreme Court, have effectively given Trump's agents permission to seize and detain people based solely on the color of their skin or the way they speak, just like the Klan could in the Old South. Under this blatantly unconstitutional decree, masked federal goons can snatch anyone they choose, hold them without due process, and claim they're, quote, immigration suspects, end quote. There are already reports of U.S. citizens, including fathers and mothers, driving their kids to school, being pulled over from their cars, cuffed, and dragged away by men in black or camo tactical gear with no badges and no warrants. One video shows a terrified child screaming as her father, a U.S. citizen brutalized in broad daylight, is shoved into an unmarked van because he looked Hispanic. They then kidnapped the terrorized child and held her for much of the day. This is not law enforcement. It's state terror. As Adam Seawer famously wrote, quote, "The cruelty is the point," end quote. Stephen Miller and his colleagues in the Trump White House appear to have designed these policies precisely to maximize fear and suffering. During Trump's first term, he bragged to colleagues that family separation worked as, quote, deterrence, end quote. Children were warehoused in cages, parents deported without them, and about 1,000 have vanished to this day through a shadowy network of pop-up, quote, Christian, end quote, foster homes that vanished after they got all the kids from the Trump administration. The trauma was, and is, intentional, an explicit message to would-be brown-skinned migrants that America would destroy their families if they came here. Now Trump et al. Are expanding that same logic nationwide, empowered by corrupt white Republicans on a Supreme Court that has abandoned the Constitution in favor of hateful, bigoted ideology and obeisance to the party that appointed them. What we're witnessing right now is the third chapter in a grim American tradition. Define a population as, quote, lesser, end quote, withhold or weaponize care, legalize and expand harassment, and watch the consequence unfold. People brutalized, children traumatized, citizens terrified, while pretending they're inevitable and the cause is noble. Hoffman's statistical analysis justified abandoning black Americans to early death by refusing them health care. Reagan's silence and cuts to government funds allowed a generation of gay men to die untreated. And Trump's immigration machine now turns suffering into policy. In each case, the people inflicting the harm claim moral superiority, that they're protecting the, quote, real, end quote, America from impunity or invasion, while what they're really doing is institutionalizing cruelty and brutality as governance while being cheered on by their bigoted white supremacist base. This is not hyperbole. When a Supreme Court packed with right-wing ideologues uses an unsigned opinion to strip away constitutional rights and greenlight racial profiling, we're no longer operating under a system that respects equal protection under the law. When federal agents are masked, unmarked, unaccountable, and armed, snatching U.S. citizens and peaceful protesters off the street, we're living in a police state. And when our national conversation treats all that as normal, we're back in Hoffman's world. The world where suffering isn't an error to be corrected, but a strategy for how the powerful maintain straight white male supremacy. We have to call this what it is: cultural and sometimes physical genocide by design. Hoffman's eugenics, Reagan's homophobic hate, and Trump's xenophobia are all the same disease in different generations. They rely on public apathy, on the willingness of good people to look away. Each time, the target group changes, but the mechanism remains. Withhold care, strip rights, justify suffering, and declare it, quote, justice, end quote, for straight white men and a society that claims they should exclusively be in charge. The outrage of the Kavanaugh stops isn't just about immigration or policing. It's about whether the United States still recognizes limits on government power. It's immoral, it's unconstitutional, and it's exactly the kind of bureaucratic evil that once hid behind actuarial tables and, quote, family values, end quote. Right-wing leaders in past fascist regimes have used it to justify the wholesale destruction of a people. We must not let history repeat itself again. We know where this road leads, to children in cages, to communities terrorized, to hospitals turning patients away, to families burying their dead while officials shrug. Hoffman, a Republican who openly celebrated the death of FDR, thought black extinction would come naturally if white men in power simply withheld care. Reagan thought the gay community would vanish if government refused to help. And Trump's America First ideologues continue to argue that non-white people will, quote, self-deport, end quote, if the state makes life unbearable enough as they welcome white South Africans. In every case, the goal is erasure of, quote, undesirable people, end quote, through pain. We have the power to stop it, but only if we refuse to normalize it. Every senator, every judge, every journalist, every citizen must confront the reality that the machinery of cruelty is running again in our names. Once a nation accepts pain as governance, democracy becomes performance, and compassion becomes treason. Republicans have perfected the unthinkable. The only question left is whether America will finally refuse to justify it. Silence is complicity. Outrage is the only moral response, and action is the only cure. Tag, you're it.